I really, really, really love the Muppets. I always have.
I love
Muppets.
Gosh, I love
Muppets.
I love how different and unique they all are. I love how quickly you can forget that they're just hands with felt over them and see them as living characters. I love how much classic movie magic has to be used to bring them to life and achieve the illusion of realism. And I love how no matter what Kermit does, the show always goes off the rails and puts him on the verge of insanity. So being here at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, it's pretty cool for me to see the real puppets shown in all the Muppet movies, some of which were actually used by Jim Henson over 40 years ago. You know something I haven't always loved? The Dark Crystal. Even when I first saw the movie at like age 9, I remember appreciating the filmmaking and how much work it probably took to make a movie like this, but I just thought it was too weird and not very engaging.
I was always more of a labyrinth guy myself.
So why am I here looking at a collection of Dark Crystal puppets and artifacts, staring in wonder like they're the greatest things I've ever seen? Well, funny you should ask. It's all because of this TV series, Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. And it's probably the best thing I've watched this year. Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room. Puppets are creepy! Puppets are childish! Puppets are outdated!
puppetry. Yay.
No.
So, why is this a puppet show? Couldn't it have been made with normal human actors, or better yet, been an animated show and appealed to a much larger audience?
Maybe.
But I think puppetry as a medium works so well for Dark Crystal in particular for a lot of reasons. Oh, so puppets are creepy? Yeah, the show knows and embraces that. This is a show with a lot of unsettling, gross, violent, sometimes straight up nightmarish stuff. And there are times where the puppetry only makes that stuff more nightmarish, which is by design. The juxtaposition of witnessing puppets, which are typically associated with children, indoor sequences of torture or violence, actually makes those scenes more affecting to the viewer, almost like a loss of innocence. As an extension of that, I think puppets also add a lot to a fantasy series in particular because they build on the idea of otherworldliness that couldn't be captured as well with regular people. The idea that this is a totally different planet to our own, with completely foreign creatures and environments and societies, is captured best by the fact that no humans ever appear. Every character is a new creation. And while you totally could construct a fantasy world in animation and have it feel distant from our own, the thing that Dark Crystal gains from the puppetry is a sense of tangibility and realism. Like, this is a place that could really exist. Outside, like, the narrative reasons, puppetry incidentally benefits the show in particular from the perspective of a prequel. Remember how the Star Wars prequels always felt kinda weird because they were set before the original trilogy, but they were also made after it, so the technology looked newer and shinier? You really don't have the same problems with this. The benefit of puppetry is that puppets are timeless and unchanging, so despite the evolution of technology in the past 40 years, this show feels like it can sit right beside the original movie without feeling jarringly different. From a technical perspective alone, the show is totally worth checking out. The fact that Netflix even allowed a 10-hour series with practical puppets to be made is incredible when almost anyone else would have deemed it too old-fashioned and time-consuming and costly. And man, you can tell everyone behind the scenes poured their hearts into making this thing. With many of the same creatives working on this as the original, the show does a brilliant job of maintaining Jim Henson's practical vision. But it also pioneers a lot of new 21st century techniques for puppetry as a medium, from removing blue screen puppeteers digitally, to using the occasional necessary green screen, to moving the camera in a way that wasn't possible 40 years ago. Director Louis Leterrier opted to shoot lots of the show with a mobile camera to make it feel more kinetic and engaging, which meant the puppeteers had to improvise and work on their feet far more than they'd have to if the shot was just locked down. Because the filmmaking used to frame the world and the characters is so cinematic and so inspired by live action, the show is totally immersive and encapsulating. Often the puppets and artistry fall away, and you feel like you've just really dropped into this living, breathing universe. And that's one of the most incredible things about it, something the original movie only scratched the surface of doing. We've talked about animated naturalism. I give you puppet naturalism. There's a scene at the beginning of the second episode that starts with a podling waking up in his bed, and we watch as he mundanely gets dressed, eats breakfast, spills food on his shirt, brushes his hair, and goes to work.
Hot take?
That's amazing! It's really indicative of how strongly the show prioritizes painting these puppets as living, breathing characters of their own accord. It's textbook movie magic, man. At any given moment in the show, there's a level of how did they do that, which makes it feel so special. You can look at a shot and get totally psyched out by all the things that must be happening outside the frame, just to make it look and work the way it does. But the technical side of things is not the only reason Age of Resistance is great. Because the original movie also had incredible technical feats and artistry, and there were a lot of people like myself who just never found it all that interesting or compelling beyond that. First and foremost, Dark Crystal Age of Resistance is a prequel show. It's set, quote, many years before the events of the original Dark Crystal movie, but a lot of things are different. So in the original film, the main characters are Jen and Kira, who are both creatures called Gelfling. In the movie, they're the last two of their kind because all the others have been wiped out by the villains, the Skeksis.
I thought I was the only one.
I thought I was.
We see some ancient ruins and old writings, but other than that, we don't really know what the other Gelfling were like before they were all killed. This is all in pretty sharp contrast to the show, which has 7 different distinct tribes of Gelfling, each with their own cultures and appearances and cities, living prosperously across the land without any knowledge that,
They're all probably gonna die.
Especially if you've seen the original movie, there's this sense of impending doom to the whole story. The knowledge that things are gonna have to go really bad before they can go right. And the audience knows that, but the characters don't, which creates a lot of bittersweet irony throughout.
If I had to compare it to anything, I'd say this show is kinda like the Rogue One to the original Dark Crystal's Star Wars.
This story is really about the sacrifice and hardship that occurred to pave the way for victory later on. Things are eventually probably gonna work out long term, but maybe not for the characters you're watching. There's plenty of political commentary too. The series is essentially about a bunch of slimy, ruling class overlords who are so desperate to hold on to their power that they'll victimize and disregard everyone below them and outright deny things like how they're destroying the planet.
Does that sound familiar?
The Skeksis are the obvious metaphor. They're evil and they're happy about it, and it's not hard to make a connection to the real world. But the most interesting, complex parts of the show come from seeing how the Gelfling are complicit in their own downfall. How so many of them are so desperate to hold on to the status quo and keep the supposed peace that they actively fight against the voices trying to awaken them to their own demise. Celadon be like,
I don't know where you heard that the Emperor is draining Gelfling of their essence, but we have some alternative facts.
I really like this scene where one of the characters is punished by having to wash and bathe podlings, and this kind of racist guy says,
None filthier creature in all of Thra than the podling.
It really reminds you how sometimes privileged people can still be low-key patronizing and demeaning toward the group they're supposedly helping. Even among the supposed good guys in this universe, there's still a layer of classism and prejudice, which adds a ton of nuance to something that could have just been black and white. For a show so heavily focused on death, be it the evil Skeksis' desperate attempts to cheat death, or the heroic Gelfling's acceptance and peace with death, things could feel overly somber and bleak. And yet, despite this gloomy foreboding and sense of impending downfall, the whole story still manages to feel earnest and optimistic and heartfelt in spite of itself. Part of this probably comes from the knowledge that good does eventually prevail down the line. But more so than that, it comes from the sense of hope and humanity baked into every minute of the show. And it's hope and humanity that matters, even when it doesn't last forever. There's a feeling of joy that comes from watching the separate storylines and characters we follow at the beginning start to intersect and interact with each other as the tale goes on, which only drives home the theme of unity in crisis. Despite the fact that no humans ever appear on screen, this is some of the most human filmmaking I've seen all year. There are many hugs to be had, lots of cute laughs and endearing characters, and an eternal spark of contagious optimism that just begs you to join with others despite your differences and fight the good fight, even when it's an uphill battle. It's a true under the covers with a flashlight kind of story, filled with very real darkness and terror, but also adventure and love and friendship. So what changed my opinion on the Dark Crystal?
What made me take back my complaints and sit in awe of Jim Henson's original vision as is? It was, obviously, this show.
Age of Resistance is the rare piece of retconning that somehow made me turn on a dime and love everything that came before. It's a prequel that doesn't rely on cheap nostalgia or callbacks or references, but actually does the impossible and uses the long-form narrative to expand the world and add depth and context to the original film. When you go back and rewatch the movie now, it feels like you're seeing a very small fraction of a much larger story. And that almost makes it more interesting somehow. I guess that's what a good prequel does.
My only complaint is that I want more. Without spoiling anything, the show definitely sets its sights on a second season, and I just hope it gets the viewership to warrant one.
Please stop paying to see The Lion King ironically and
Start supporting original, creative content like this. Rianne may look like surprised Pikachu from time to time, but I promise, these puppets emote more than CGI lions.
Choose